In reality, a lot of the ideas about Native Americans in both North and South America are the product of blatant propaganda in modern language. White colonizers, when they witnessed the life and ways of the local inhabitants, were in fact shocked, and many of the traditions and customs of the local tribes with regard to both hygiene and medicine were indeed appalling to Europeans. And as sad as it is to acknowledge it, the shock was due to the fact that the European understanding of hygiene that existed at the time was fundamentally different from that of the Native Americans. Today we will tell you about hygiene among Native Americans. We continue. You're watching Flip Side of History. For one instance, the use of an analog of modern chewing gum by Native Americans was initially sharply disapproved of. Locals actively used a mixture of bitumen and sapodilla tree to make their breath more fresh. When Europeans tried this prototype of chewing gum, they felt a slight feeling of unwellness, thus deciding that the product was not good for their health. Well, surely Europeans were disgusted by the tradition of brushing teeth with urine, which was actively used by the Aztecs. But to be clear, urine was also used to whiten teeth even by people in ancient Rome. Here we should also add that in 19th century America, brown and black teeth were considered a sign of power and wealth, which for Native Americans was completely unacceptable. And before describing other, in the view of the colonists of that time, horrible hygienic procedures of the indigenous tribes, let us note that the same Aztecs were very much concerned about the smell from their armpits, so they took the procedure for removing it quite seriously. Bunyan wrote in the year 1552, for example, how the Aztecs advised dealing with the problem of unpleasant odor. Let the ill-smelling person enter the prepared bath and wash his armpits thoroughly. Let him be there for a longer period of time. Then take the crushed chiavaxihuitl plant, rub himself with it. The juice of the plant smells nicely of the flowers. Bathhouse. It may seem peculiar, but the first thing that really disgusted the white colonists was the mass use of baths by the Native Americans. The bathhouses had different names from tribe to tribe. For instance, the Yurok tribes, people called them the House of Sweat. Others used open hot geothermal waters as baths. And it should be said that the attitude to cleanliness among the inhabitants of the Americas was, to some extent, even obsessive. The already mentioned Yurkas visited the House of Sweat even after intimacy with a woman. And, by the way, every morning a member of the Yurok tribe had to perform this ceremonial rite in order to be blessed by the spirits for their successful fishing. According to the Native American beliefs, whatever flows through one pathway of life feeds in abomination to the defilement contact with the contents of the other pathways. Therefore, even simply taking a piss in a river or lake was not only strictly forbidden, but the trespasser could face a rather serious punishment. Women also had no right to go near water bodies during the critical days, so as not to accidentally defile the water or insult the fish, which could be offended and leave, leaving the whole tribe to starve to death. Childbirth and feeding. Male colonists and their spouses, as well as simple European settler women, often wrote with disgust about this as well. It was particularly startling that Native American women often gave birth while lying on the sand. What people are forgetting, however, is that the bed of sand was specially prepared to save the woman in labor from many of the problems that could have arisen when the particular tribe was nomadic. Actually, the sand allowed the woman to be protected as much as possible from dirt and infections during childbirth. In case a woman gave birth in fixed conditions, as a rule, the birth process took place either in a bathhouse or in a hot springs. It is interesting that even in breastfeeding, women of Native American peoples had a very thoughtful approach. They believed that breast milk was poison to the baby, so the baby was breastfed only when real milk began to flow. Furthermore, nursing was so important to the indigenous population that while nursing, even the father had no right to even attempt to obtain intimacy from his wife, which again is not even practiced in many present-day families nowadays. The toilets and shamans. Here too, Europeans were struck by the fact that the indigenous people did not create a single public toilet, believing it to be a sign of barbarism and savagery. However, from the point of view of the Native Americans, it was the creation of places of defecation that was a sign of barbarism. The local population had their natural necessities at a remote distance from their habitation in a dry place. They considered that creating a restroom in no way prevented flies from reaching human excrement, and flies were known to carry infections and contagion over long distances. Therefore, the original population of Americas gave their own waste to the sun and wind, which quickly dried and prevented the flies from starting their dirt roller coaster. As for the shamans, it would be fair to conclude that the disgust of Europeans was understandable enough. Well, perhaps it was the shamans to a greater extent that were even cringe-inducing to Europeans. Despite the fact that the shaman, as a person communicating with spirits, was respected in every tribe, he had to perform rather creepy procedures concerning himself, which caused only shivering and detestation. To cure the diseased, the shaman often took the disease upon himself, and in order to please the spirits, he was obliged to perform various rituals of sacrifice, such as piercing his tongue, making cuts on the body, and sticking needles from cactuses and trees under his skin. It could go even to the point where the shaman was sometimes forced to pierce his own fertile organ as well. Obviously, such a tradition could not be understood or appreciated by the white men in any way. Creepy hygiene inventions. Although, of course, from the viewpoint of a civilized person today, one might somewhere claim that Native American views on hygiene were backward. But once again, the tribes of the Native Americans were very progressive for their time. After all, it was the colonists who banned Native Americans from visiting baths, and they did so under threat of the death penalty. At the time when almost nothing was known about painkillers in European countries, the inhabitants of the Americas actively used in medical operations products made from the so-called distemper herb. And astonishingly, the use of this herb for enjoyment was strictly taboo. Another development initially not accepted by the Europeans referred to the way the Native Americans treated the sick by penetrating their veins. In practice, as archaeologists have long proved, the Native Americans, far before the arrival of the white men, used a simple injector through which they introduced into their bodies fluids prepared from mixtures of broths of various herbs. Finally, the white man was surprised that mothers fed their children from something that appeared to resemble a gut. But in essence, it was the first prototype of a feeding bottle made from bear guts, treated with resin and oil. The indigenous people discovered that bear intestines kept breast milk fresh for a rather long time. A procedure not originally adopted by Europeans, the Americans' hygienic procedure of putting some powder in their mouths was actually quite effective in getting rid of toothache and gum inflammation. They made the powder from these intoxylum bushes, which were even nicknamed the toothache tree. The inhabitants of Americas were able to quickly get rid of lice, mites, fleas, as well as recover from dysentery and stomach problems. Finally, again, unbelievable but yes, true. The Native Americans even had modern analogs of quinine and eye droplets in their list of medications. And the well-known white American pine, which Europeans used to build masts, was used by Native Americans as a powerful health aid, getting rid of swellings and even curing malignant tumors. We can say in different words that all the seeming creepiness that the local population did is in fact quite commonplace and obligatory in the modern world. We can acknowledge the fact that the tribes of the Americas were very advanced in terms of hygiene and many aspects of healthcare. You were watching Flip Side of History. Subscribe, leave a like, and take a look at our other videos.